So I suppose some of the key things that are needed to support reflection actually are about how do we address the barriers in lots of ways, aren't they? So all of these things become connected as we're talking it through. I think definitely reflective supervision is really important. And, you know, I mean, I do a lot of work on reflective supervision, but one of the things that really has struck me and is maybe something we need to think about as a profession is that we know that the most significant influencer on how we provide supervision is the supervision that we ourselves receive. And I think a lot of managers aren't getting reflective supervision, so they're not providing reflective supervision. So it fits all the way up. There needs to be a almost like an ethos embedded in the organisation that everybody needs to have reflective supervision. So this isn't just for frontline practitioners, this is for everybody. Reflective supervision is really important, I think, for everybody, and that space and an acknowledgement that reflection is important. I also think that critical friendships matter. I mean, you talked about that earlier, didn't you? But just having that person who will ask you questions that you've not thought about, you know, will engage you in a reflective conversation. And I wonder whether we need to formalise that a bit more now, because if you like, when we were all in a busy team together, people would just kind of informally find someone that they could bounce ideas off, and it was almost like an informal critical friendships developed within teams. But actually, now that we're working in this different way, especially when someone is new to a team, you know, I mean, I've been talking to people who are 6 months into their job who've never met some of their team members. You know, I've talked to managers who've never met the new team members, you know, so I think critical friendships being developed in that same informal way is more difficult. So perhaps one of the things that we really need is almost that, I was going to use the word permission, but I almost want to take it further than permission to almost like a requirement to create a critical friendship, not just a permission to do it, but a requirement to have critical friendships where you'll check in with one another through the day, or if you need to talk about something, you've got that. I think that matters outside of reflective supervision. I think also, you know, improved models, ownership of models, teams having models. I know some teams do things like a model of the week for reflection, or, you know, that they create their own model that they use. So I think something more around more dialogue about different models of reflection, I think that would definitely help. And then there's a bit of a curveball here that isn't really talked about very much at all in the UK, but is intervision. So, I mean, that's very big in Scandinavia and a lot of the Germanic countries, and, you know, it's quite widely used in other areas of Europe. But intervision is, and it's just really hard for us to understand almost over here. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but we would think about group supervision, but group supervision is different. Intervision is about a group of people coming together who are all peers, if you like. So there's no manager running it or facilitating it. It's just all peers coming together. But the focus is not on here where we have group supervision. People tend to bring one, you know, piece of work, you know, and they take it in turns. I'll bring a case and we'll all talk about it, and we'll all, where intervision isn't about that at all. It's not about case discussion. It's about you as a worker. So it's you talking about how you're feeling about your practice at the moment, the impact that practice is having on you. And I think that sort of really bringing people together to talk about themselves in the context of their working practice is really helpful. I think it encourages and increases reflective abilities and emotional intelligence and all of that. So there's, if you like, a wish list of something I would love to see, but that we don't really have at the moment. But that's something I think we could really be working towards. So it doesn't replace supervision, and you still need reflective supervision, and you could still have group supervision, but supervision and intervision offer two different things, I think. And I'd like to see a growth of intervision in this country. That's my thoughts.
That's something I haven't heard of before, and I think it's really interesting. And I think that would help social workers develop and work on that emotional intelligence, really understanding what our emotions are, what they mean, why we're feeling like that. So I think that's definitely something exciting to explore further. But to go back to the other points you made as well, which were exactly the kind of things that came to my mind when I was thinking about the key things, having that space and supervision that should be available to everybody, managers alike, but how that space also needs to be a safe space where you feel like you can talk honestly. I think I was on a webinar recently where somebody said that we're not always honest about our feelings in supervision because we're scared of being judged. We're scared that people will think we're not very good social workers or we're not doing our job properly. So that space and that relationship you develop with your supervisor or the person that's doing a group reflective session or within your team, that critical friend, it has to be somebody that you can speak openly and honestly with. And that's something that needs to be worked on, I think, in terms of a relationship. And then lastly, just what you were saying about having that critical friend, I definitely think that's a really positive way forward for social workers. I think as a practitioner, I definitely had a team member who I knew that I could always have very open, frank discussions with, and who I knew would maybe challenge me, but without making it feel really uncomfortable. So I knew it would never affect our friendship, even though she might say to me, you know, why are you doing it that way? Or do you think you're doing that in the right way? Because that's what it's about. It's about having somebody to share those ideas and thoughts with, and somebody that you trust enough to kind of have those open discussions with.
That's really interesting, isn't it? That it's all about relationships, you know, and we've said reflection and social work are essentially one and the same. Well, you know, relationships is the key in social work in the same way maybe it's the key in reflection. So that's really interesting. But then the other thing that came to my mind when you were talking about that need to be able to be open and honest and not feel like you're being judged, I also think that goes back a little bit to our training, because students, you know, and I know I've done this myself as well, if you're writing a reflective account that's going to be marked, you're not always honest. You think about, well, what's going to meet the learning criteria and what's going to get me the highest grade? And you're not necessarily going to say exactly how you felt. You're going to say, oh, and I used this bit of theory because that comes. So I think it almost starts us off from the basis of, well, reflection is about what other people think of you and how you're going to be judged and how you're going to be marked. And so that's quite interesting, isn't it? I don't know how we get over that, because I think there's always going to be an element of, when you are writing a reflection that's for CPD even, you know, I did a reflective piece over the weekend that I uploaded to the regulator, and I'm not, I mean, I think I was largely honest, but I probably threw in a few bits that I thought, oh, that'll meet that CPD requirement. So I think we're not always, when we're doing reflection for something else, for a purpose, it's not always reflection, truly reflection. But, you know, let's maybe just be more honest about that and just say, okay, sometimes when we're writing a reflection, we are doing that to meet particular criteria. And so it's just being more honest about it, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because that made me think about the work that we do with individuals and families, and thinking about that relationship and really the parallels of what we do as social workers, but what we do within our interventions with families, because we're expecting families to be open and honest with us about things when we know there are times that they might be saying the things that we want to hear, the same as what you just said about what we might do in our reflective spaces as well. So it's interesting, isn't it, how it all kind of parallels with each other.
Absolutely. Well, people are people, and that's always going to be people, isn't it?